Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast, hosted by Kristen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey y'all, welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so glad that you're listening today. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. Now, if this is your first time listening, I just want to remind you, be sure to listen to the end of every episode. That's where we have the kids only segment where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Well, I am so glad that you guys are here today, and I don't know who you are listening with today. I love hearing from families saying they listen in the car when they're driving to and from all their practices and different activities. That's a really cool thing to do. I've also heard of families that like to listen to this as they're getting ready for bed or as they're getting ready to wind down for the evening. That's a really fun time to do it. I really love listening to podcasts when I'm doing chores. It kind of makes some of those things like the dishes or laundry go a little bit faster. So wherever you're listening from and whoever you're listening with, I hope that you are enjoying this with your family, especially if you're listening with your dad today, because today's episode has a lot to do with fathers. And I am so excited about our guest today, who is a father of 3 kids. His name is Adam Sculnick. He is passionate about 2 things: faithfully teaching the Word of God and shepherding his family well. Professionally, he does the best he can to do those 2 things, driving ideas to influence people across the world through writing books, speaking at churches and conferences. His love for children's ministry and his passion for discipleship shine clearly in everything he does. Currently, Adam serves as the lead pastor of a church in Fremont, Michigan, and he has written an amazing book that is just for dads, but has something exciting that kids can be a part of in each chapter. And I think you're just going to love this idea and hearing all this great information and advice, especially for our fathers and our families that are listening. So here is my conversation with Adam Sculnick. Well, Adam, I am so excited to have you on the Collide Kids podcast again.
Yeah, me too. It was fun the first time, so I'm glad we get a second round.
Yeah, we got to do it again. It's so fun. So would you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Totally. And actually, this is different than the last time.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So I am now the lead pastor at a little church in West Michigan, Second Christian Reformed Church. It's in a town called Fremont, which has, I think, more cows than people.
Wow.
It's a cool town. It's unique. It's where Gerber was founded. So It's like way more things than a usual small town would have. It's everything you need and nothing you don't. So it's really cool coming from like South Florida, where there was like bajillions of people in my town and lots of big box stuff. There's a lot of mom and pop stuff here. It's really cool.
Nice.
So I get to minister to people here and love on the community and get to know people and raise my family around farms instead of around smog.
Well, that's nice. I love that. I love that you love where you are. And now are you like, does your house like butt up against a cow farm or something, or you just drive past them all the time?
So Fremont there's cows and corn.
Okay.
And I live just outside the city limit. So like the city limit stops. And if you follow the road that I'm on in either direction, you hit at least one farm if you go far enough. But then the homes are scattered in such a way that there's people who have chickens and people who have horses and people who have like dairy farms and people who have corn. And it's a really cool mix. But then there's also like a super, I don't know, high tech sounds like such a cheesy word, but a very advanced hospital in town. There's also like the Gerber plant is here. And so there's a really cool mix of people. Like population wise, it's weird because you wouldn't expect all these people to live in one spot.
Yeah, that's really neat. I'm so excited for you. And before that, because last time we talked about the CIA Boys Club. And so are you still associated with that?
I run a local CIA here at my church just for the boys here in the church and the community. Back in June or July, I really felt like God was like pushing me to move into pastoral ministry more full time. So I was a pastor, but I was the pastor of CIA. And so being the executive director of that ministry was more my main role. But I felt like God was kind of pushing me in another direction. The story is too long, I think, to tell on this podcast. But the way in which I ended up here was so, you ever have one of those moments where like everything is obvious that God is moving?
Yes.
Like there's no doubt at all. It just,
Right.
there just wasn't.
Yeah.
God was so in this on both sides, my family side and also the church here. I can sort of encapsulate it in one small piece, which is the service that they were using to connect the pastor because the search committee was having a hard time finding like traditional ways of tracking pastors. He doesn't know how he got my resume. I don't know how he got my resume because I wasn't sending it out.
Oh, wow. And here you are. That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to talk with you today, especially because you have a book coming out, which is really exciting, especially for dads and families. And so I can't wait to talk to you about that. But before we do that, because this is a podcast for kids, I always make my guests tell me a really good joke. So what you got for us today?
Okay, so good is relative. I'm a dad and I have a thing for dad jokes, and I just love to see how far I can get my wife's eyes to roll when I tell them. So, okay. Stick with me. What is the difference between a tuna fish, a piano, and a bucket of glue?
Oh, I don't know.
You can tune a piano. You cannot piano a tuna.
You can tune a piano, but what about the glue?
I figured you'd get stuck on that one.
Ah.
I said it was relative. I didn't say it was good.
I love dad jokes. Dad jokes are they're always so classic. And I laugh at all of them because I have a corny sense of humor. The cornier, the better.
Me too. I'm glad we're on the same page.
That's right. Well, let's talk a little bit about your book. Tell me what the name of it is and why you chose to write a book for dads.
Intentional Fatherhood is the name of the book. The inspiration was sort of an observation that I had about the state of families, I guess is the easiest way to put that. So if you look at the landscape of the Christian home, there is generationally between my kids' generation, my generation, and my parents' generation, there's this shift that's happened where my parents' generation, the people above me, they were raised in like a counterculture where they didn't love but were forced to go to church. Then there was a shift. They sort of rebelled against that. So they allowed my generation to not see it as a priority. So then there's been another shift where it's become a priority, but my generation is not equipped. And so they pass it on to people who are. And so you see a lot of education being done by the state, so whatever school the kid goes to, and religious education, especially in Christianity, being done by the church. So kids go to children's ministry and then youth ministry and then young adult ministry, and the parents go to worship, and it's like a separate thing that they just do at the same time. But what ends up happening is in the home, it looks very much like every other home. It's a secular environment. So the kids are doing their thing and the adults are doing their thing. And even when they're together, faith is not the center of it. But if you look back historically, Christianity had almost always been that the home was the center of your faith, and then it worked itself out into the church and the community. And so I just wonder what it might look like to re-engage the family in that. And so that between that and a really startling couple of statistics that I saw about lackings in church ministry, as it turns out, men are the largest lacking demographic in most North American churches. Men don't come to church. Moms bring their kids. Men go fishing or watch football or sleep in because they worked all week or whatever, but it's just not a priority for men. And so you can sort of tell in the way that homes are structured and the way that kids are rebelling against the church in like ridiculously high numbers, like you can sort of tell that there's a gap. And so I thought, I don't know, I'll try to get in that game and work on it a little. So I wrote Intentional Fatherhood for dads, but it's not a standalone do this and then try to learn what I taught you. Mm-hmm. Each chapter is meant for the dad to read and engage with. And then the follow-up, like contemplative part at the end of each chapter is meant to be engaged with the dad and the son so that you're creating a discipling relationship. And then there's like a series of chapters at the end after the meat of the book is done where it talks about how to apply this if your son is in middle school, how to apply it as they go into high school, how to apply it as they plan for and attend college, how to prepare them to marry. So it's meant to help you get back into that old pattern of men teaching their sons to be men who can then teach their sons to be men. And then we have generations of, strong men who can lead in their churches and lead in their homes, not because women can't, but because women shouldn't do it by themselves. You see a lot of strong women with like no support. So I love strong women. I think they should have strong men to go alongside them.
I agree. That's so good. And I love that there's a component in there where they get to engage with their kids. So that's really great that you've written that. And I love that it's about teaching dads or helping dads to engage in spiritual matters and things about God. Because I think a lot of times, really great dads out there and they teach their kids to be, the best they can and good behavior, but it's so much more when there's biblical support under that, right?
Yeah, the last thing I want is for a whole nother generation of kids to just think that dad wants them to perform. I tell people this all the time when I do conferences, or when I was doing conferences, I would say, men have this really unique thing when they get to become a father in that they share a title with God. God is our father. We get to also be fathers. And so our kids are going to look at us and see a model. And whether we do a good job or not, we're still modeling God. And so if all we expect of our sons, especially our sons, but our daughters also, if we just expect performance and obedience, we're not really modeling who God is. And then you end up with a whole generation of kids who have an unhealthy view of God and then an unhealthy view of the church. And then they don't want to go to church and then they don't care about God. And that's what we're seeing. So I'd like to reverse that trend if I can, or help to anyway.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what's in the book. Like for those dads who okay, I need to be more intentional about this. So how are you helping dads? What are some ideas you're giving dads to interact with their families?
Yeah. So I have this fundamental belief that you cannot reinvent the wheel. And, the gospel, it says in Romans, this is like a life verse of mine. Romans 1:16 is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it's the power of God for salvation. And I really believe that, if the gospel is the power, I'm not going to try to come up with an addendum to the power. I'm just going to use the gospel. And so the book opens with a couple of chapters about, how to use this if you are a dad, a way that you could use it if you are a church, to engage dads, and then a small piece about if you're a mom of boys without a dad in the picture. And then it goes into what the gospel is. A model presentation. If you were going to give the gospel to somebody, often people, if you're asked what the gospel is, the typical evangelical Christian answer is, well, Christ died for my sins, which is not wrong. But then people would most people, especially in this post-Christian society, are like, well, first of all, why did he have to die? And then second, what do you mean sins? I'm a good person. And so that message is not complete. And so there's a complete presentation of the gospel. And then there are 8 chapters that break down individual pieces of that gospel presentation. Then a story that encapsulates that piece worked out in real life. They're not true stories, but they're meant to read like they are. And then there's a follow-up section. So you can read the story with your son just to have discussion. What did you see in the story? Then there's a teaching moment because as the dad, you read the chapter. Your son didn't, but he heard the story. So then you unpack the story, having read the chapter, and then you go through the questions that follow the story with your son together. And then after that, there are, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, there are a number of different chapters on specific life application for discipleship. So the subtitle of the book is A Tactical Guide to Deeper Gospel-Centered Relationships Between Fathers and Sons. So then outside of just the gospel teaching, what other ways can we disciple our sons to be men of God? So, okay, if you're in middle school, you can do a really easy Google search and say, these are the challenges of a middle school boy. Okay, well, if I'm a middle school boy's dad, how do I minister to him during this time? So it unpacks that a little bit. Then it does the same thing for high school. Then there's 2 chapters on college. One of them is preparing your kid to live in that world. And then the other one is sort of an abridged discussion on Christian schooling versus non-Christian schooling and whether it matters and whatever. And then there's 2 chapters at the end about adulting intentionally. So like, how do I prepare my son to be a functioning member of society? And how do I prepare my son to be an effective father and husband? So if I'm going to teach my son how to marry, well, what does that mean? It means that there are rules you should follow for dating so that you set proper expectations. There's ways in which you treat a woman because God teaches you to. There are expectations you should have and shouldn't have. There are things that, maybe are weird to talk about, but we kind of need to. Things that you shouldn't, even though the world says to, you shouldn't expect a woman to do. So it just sort of unpacks all the things that men don't get. Like, I never had that. I had a single mother, so like she did her best, but we never had those conversations because I didn't have a dad around. And I thought that was because I didn't have a dad around. But then I'm finding as I meet people, so now I've lived in South Florida and West Michigan, and a lot of men in my age group with dads that they grew up with also did not have the how do I be a good dad conversation or how do I be a good husband. Like, they didn't have those. So it's not because my dad wasn't around. It's because we just don't teach it anymore. So the end of the book is sort of how to teach that part. And then there's a couple of appendixes that with like lists of tools you can use, like other resources, just to equip dads in as many ways as possible.
It's comprehensive. So it's getting all the stages of fatherhood for those dads. So this sounds like a great book that lots of people are going to lean into as a resource. So that's awesome. So let's think about the kids that are listening right now. They're listening maybe with their dad or with their mom and dad, and they're thinking, okay, well, what does this book have to do with me? Like, why is it important for me and my dad to have these conversations? We'll be right back after this. Raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
Our faith, per the Bible, our faith is meant to be lived out publicly. It's meant to be part of the home. It's meant to be part of your youth, part of your adulthood. It's a spectrum that you are always in at some point. You're either absorbing the information or you're passing down the information. It's a constant rinse and repeat cycle, and that's how the faith has traditionally been spread. But what has ended up happening is that it doesn't sound fun and appealing when you're contrasting like, oh, Bible conversation, I don't know, Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever. Like, kids, there's so many things that are seemingly more engaging.
Yeah.
And dads don't want to do those things. And this doesn't sound like fun. And so there's a compromise. Well, if I want to spend time with my kid, I'm going to go where my kid is already having fun and be a part of that. And what I've found, not just with my own kids, but like with my work with boys ministry previous to taking the pastor job here and just work in general with families, kids don't necessarily want their parents to be kids with them. They want their kids to be interested in their things. So I would rather have a conversation about the fun time you had playing a video game, but then draw you into a different relationship with me rather than like drop down to being one of your friends. Because I'm not your friend, I'm your dad.
Right. That's different.
That's different, right? So I want to try to encourage dads to be more fun, but also raise their kids to be strong Christians, sort of at the same time, and make that fun also. And so how do you do that if you've never been taught? So that's what the goal is. And so I guess if a kid were to say, what does this have anything to do with me? I guess the easy response is, well, don't you want to have fun with your dad?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be more awesome? So that's the hope, is engage dads in that.
Yeah. What is it about dads that makes that such an important relationship in kids' lives?
So I always hate when somebody says that and then I like throw a Bible verse at them, but I feel like there's almost no other way to do this. In the Bible, there are specific relationships that are sort of central to certain environments. So like there's a lot of energy put onto like the qualities a pastor should have because it's a role that's central to the Christian life. And fatherhood is one of those. So like Ephesians 5 and 6, the end of 5 and the beginning of 6, Paul goes on this whole like rant almost about the family unit and the roles of the whole family unit. And people typically focus on just 5, which is husband and wife, or just 6, which is father, son. But what's cool is we created those divisions. So there's only a chapter 5 and a chapter 6 and a verse 1 and a verse 2 and whatever, because several hundred years after it was written, somebody made it easier to study. Paul's letter originally was just a letter. There was no division. And so in Paul's letter, it wasn't chapter 5 ends about a discussion with marriage and chapter 6 opens with a discussion on parenting. It was actually just, here's the family, and the fulcrum, the center of that entire conversation is the role of the husband and father. If the father and husband is serving properly, then he's loving his child the way that God loved him, and he's loving his wife the way Christ loved the church. And if he's not doing that, then the description is fathers don't belabor your children. So like, don't yell at them, don't make their life more complicated. That's not like don't give them chores and don't discipline them and whatever, but it's like right. Love them enough to teach them the way that they're supposed to function and honor them and teach them to grow and to do what you're doing. It's like the center axle on a wheel. If that's messed up, you could have the best tires and it's still going to be a terrible ride.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's such a big deal that dads get back into this game, because it's not fair to ask your wife to carry this whole load when God is the one specifically saying, get involved. And then to expect more of your kids than you expect of yourself, I think is an upside down premise also. So,
yeah. You know, it's something I hear a lot from parents that I get to interact with or worked with, or even some of my friends will say, you know, I just don't feel like I know enough about the Bible. Like, so I'd rather my kids learn from people that know about the Bible at church. And then, you know, I'll just try to like pray with them and things like that. So what is it like? What can we do with our kids for those people that don't feel like they have enough Bible knowledge to start teaching their kids? What can they do?
Yeah, I think there is a weird expectation because of the way in the Western world we're taught things. Our entire educational system is based on the university model of teaching, which is an expert teaches a pupil to become an expert. So like you can't teach until you've got a degree that says you understand the material. Mm-hmm. So as a parent, well, I don't have a degree, I can't teach my kid. That's new. That's like a recent development in the history of the world. So I would say 2 things. Number 1, that's nonsense. You don't have to know everything to teach something.
Right.
And then number 2, vulnerability is something that we tend to hide from our kids, but it's a powerful teaching tool.
Yes.
In 2 Corinthians, it talks about our Christ says, my power is made perfect in weakness. Our weakness reflects the strength of God. So if I say to my son, we're going to read this chapter of the Bible together, and I have no idea what I just read. You know, the fear as a parent is, oh my gosh, he's about to ask me a question that I can't answer. Mm-hmm. Totally normal fear. But then when my son says, what does that mean? If you respond with some nonsense you made up, you're leading them poorly. But wouldn't it just be easy to be like, you know, I don't know the answer to that. Let's write it down and then you and me can ask the pastor together on Sunday.
Yeah.
Like that's why we have church, right? So that there's like a resident expert that everybody knows.
Right.
Like, you do that on every other area of your life. If you have like an electrical blow in your, basement, you're not like, I'm just not going to have electricity anymore. You call the electrician.
Right.
Call the pastor. If you don't have his number, not everybody does. Like we have a small church, so like everybody has my phone number. Let's say you're at a bigger church, like the church I came from in Florida. Most people didn't have the pastor's number because there's like 1,000 people. It's too many. But you could go on Sunday and ask someone, and then you're showing. Mm-hmm. Remember that modeling thing for dads, you're modeling for your child. It's okay to not know. It's not okay to remain ignorant because It's God, it's the Bible. You should want to know. So if you come across something you don't know, you seek the answer. So you show them seeking the answer. It teaches them that vulnerability is okay and it gets them the answer and you did it together, which is the relationship you're trying to have. And you lose all of those things by staying out of the game.
Yeah. I love that point that you just brought up too, that it's not okay to just not know. And I think that's something that a lot of people hold on to is just, well, it's it's just a mystery about God, or it's just a mystery about the Bible. But we have so many resources in front of us. And so it's okay to not know, but it's not okay to sit in that. Like, if it is possible for you to reach out to someone or to do your own research or start looking through commentaries and Bible references and figure it out together, that's huge.
We live in an age of like infinite resources at your fingertips. So if you don't know a person, look up a person. If you aren't comfortable talking to an individual and you'd rather read it in a book, what if you just ask the pastor via email so that you don't have to like do it in person? Do you have a book I can read on, insert subject here? Like, he's probably got one. You can just ask. It's okay. Ask. Like, my sons, when they were, 10 or 11, they had a Sunday school teacher. Her name was Sarah. And Miss Sarah was the director. And she prayed with them on Sundays and taught them stuff. And I felt like Sarah, I was a new Christian. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, Aiden asked me a question. My son Aiden asked me a question. I couldn't answer. And I thought I could probably, but I wasn't comfortable. And I was just like, ask Sarah. And then he did. And she answered him. And then he taught me. Like, there's so many ways with so many people that you can grow, either in person or using the internet or using a book. There's too many ways to just not know or to be frozen from taking an action because you don't know. There's too many ways, too many resources.
That's right. And I think too, it's helpful, if your pastor maybe doesn't know or doesn't have that answer, for finding out ways that they discover what the answers are. Because I think we also can look up too much information, and we, like TikTok told me that this is true, or YouTube said, and there's a lot of crazy people out there. So we want to have resources we can trust. You're putting out a resource right now to help families, and I think that's so great. Earlier, we were talking about some game ideas or some activities where dads and kids can engage and kind of try to stump each other. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know if I made this up or not. I like to say that I came up with things, but I probably didn't. I call it Did You Know? Message about Noah a couple of years ago. I took 6 or 7 different Bibles and I brought them all up onto the platform. And I read the same 2 verses about Noah from all of those different, they weren't translations. They were like the children's storybook Bible and the picture Bible. And they're all like kids' books, right? Mm-hmm. And they all describe Noah in really weird different ways that only sound weird if you read it against the backdrop of the actual text of the Bible. Mm-hmm. It was like, Noah was God's best friend. And I was like, it doesn't say that. Anyway, so it got me thinking, like, if you distill down a Bible story that's familiar to like a kid's level, you often lose a lot of the really interesting details. Mm-hmm. And so the game is, did you know? And then if you fill in the blank with a detail from a story that everybody knows. Mm-hmm. And so the example I always use, did you know that Delilah did not cut Samson's hair? And everyone goes, whoa, yes, she did. That's the story. I've known it since I was 6. But actually, if you read that story, Delilah figures out what Samson's weakness is. And then the Philistines come in and cut his hair. She doesn't do the cutting. Mm-hmm. But everybody says she does, because in the children's version of the story, the distilled down version, Delilah, whatever. And there's stuff like that all over the Bible. And so you come up with like a little bit of rules. You can do it at the dinner table, do it before bed, whatever, but have like a point in the day where the kids know this is the game that's going to get played, and challenge them to stump you. So like the rules are really easy. If the child stumps the parent, they get to pick dinner that night. So I don't care if I was going to make chicken. If you stumped me, we can go to McDonald's if that's what you want. My kids hate this game now because I'm a pastor and I study the Bible professionally. And so they don't win anymore, which is their fault, not mine.
Right.
So create challenges. I try not to like hold things over my kids. And so it's not like if I stump you, you have an extra chore to do, because then it stops being fun. So I would caution the parents to be careful about what their like I won thing is. Uh-huh. Make the I won thing fun or silly, or like a dare or something. So like if your kid is really embarrassed of you, and so he asks you to drop him off like down the road from the school. If I win tomorrow, I get to drop you off right in the front.
Yeah.
Which makes your life a little easier. And it also but it shows them that you'd rather be more in their life than less in their life. So it's a little harder for the parents to figure out the prizes than for when the kids win. But then it becomes a challenge. The point of the challenge isn't necessarily to win. The point from the adult side is, I'm challenging you to learn more about the Bible. Mm-hmm. Because in the process of studying God's word, you discover things to ask me if I knew.
That is a fun game. I think lots of families would enjoy that. Well, Adam, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so glad to have you back. And I'm excited about your book for families and for dads to be more intentional with their kids. I think that's so important. So thank you for doing that. Can you tell our listeners where they can find your book?
Yeah, so this one is an easy one. Amazon. Kindle as an ebook or printed as a paperback. I tried to make it as accessible as possible. And so it works through Prime. It works through whatever. I think it's in almost all of the Amazon markets that are available. So if you're listening, in Canada or India or Mexico or whatever, you can get it there also.
Very cool. Well, you guys definitely go check out his book, Intentional Fatherhood. Okay, Adam, before I let you go, I always ask my guests to share a memory from when they were a kid. So what do you want to share with us today?
There's a photo that my mom has of, full disclosure, I don't know how old I was. I was 5 or 6 or 7. I'm sitting on a donkey or a pony or something. It was a field trip that my mom was a chaperone for. So I was a single parent household, and I was an only child. So it's just me and my mom worked a lot. So I don't have a ton of memories of doing things with my mom as a kid. And I maybe only have this memory because there's a photo of it. But I went on this field trip with my school, and everybody got to ride this pony, and I just didn't want to. I was young, and I didn't want to do it, and it was embarrassing, and I just didn't want to sit on this pony. And I don't remember a lot about why, and I don't remember how I felt afterwards. I just remember I have this photo that my mom took of me just miserable, mean mug on the pony. So I'm sitting there holding the little reins thing, just
I hate this.
I hate my life. And the reason that I like that story so much and the reason it's such a cool memory is not because I hated the pony, but because my mom was with me on the field trip. So even though I was not a happy camper, yes, I can look back at that miserable pony ride and think, my mom was there for that. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of been, as an adult, it's been the reason why I will make sure that I prioritize things my kids are doing over anything else I can do. Because they're only kids once, and that's the stuff that I remembered. So I imagine that's the stuff my kids will remember also.
That's good. I love that. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being on the show today, and good luck with your book. I think that's going to be such a great resource for families.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the time.
What a great encouragement for the parents that are listening, especially for any of the dads that are listening to this episode today. I know that there's so many things that you are going to love about Adam's book. I love all the things that he was sharing with us about how intentional we need to be as parents, and that father-child relationship is really so important. It was something that God put together, he ordained, and it's very special. I also love that Adam reminded us that the chapter and the verse numbers were added later in a time when the Bible was published and put together. So those are things that we sometimes use and we take it apart as different thoughts. But the writers of the Bible, like Paul, when he was writing the book of Ephesians, it's all one big story, one big passage or idea, and it goes together. It's just a great way to think about Scripture. Instead of thinking about it verse by verse or chapter by chapter, to think about the big picture and all that was trying to be said. I think that's just a great way to think about Scripture as we're reading it and keep everything in context. Adam also told us that parents do not have to be experts to teach their kids about the Bible. We can learn along with them. And this reminded me a lot of a conversation I had with another dad named Joel Muddamalle, who is a theologian and encouraged all of us to be theologians. So if you really like this conversation today and you want to hear something a little bit similar to that, check out my conversation with Joel Muddamalle in episode 120. Well, I am so excited about Adam's book, and I hope that you are too. So if you want to check out his book, Intentional Fatherhood, a tactical guide to deep gospel-centered relationships between fathers and sons, it is available on Amazon, and I highly encourage you to pick up this book. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So here is a joke from my friends Easton and Ryder.
Hi, I'm Easton. Hi, I'm Ryder. Hey, Ryder. What? What has hands but can't clap? I don't know. A clock.
What a great laugh. I love that. Well, hey, if you would like to share your favorite joke or your favorite Bible verse or a song that you like to sing or maybe just something fun you want to talk about, just go to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and click the tab at the top that says Kids Only. You can record it right there, and it is so easy to do. Or you can find information about how to send it to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod, and I would love for you to follow me there. And if you would like to support the podcast, there's a few ways you can do that. You can subscribe and follow this podcast so that new episodes will automatically load each week into whatever podcast app you're using, and leave a rating and a review. When you do that, it really does give podcast shows like mine a boost in the podcast app, and more people get to hear about it. It's so great. You can also share this episode with friends and family and tell them why you and your family like to listen to the Collide Kids podcast. Or you can go by my website and click the link that says support. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. Well, I hope you and your family have an amazing week together. I hope that those dads out there get some time to have those intentional conversations with their kids. And in case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so very much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.